She moved silently between rows of uniforms, unnoticed till the Admiral walked in and recognized the ghost in the room. The briefing room hummed with low-light panels and the faint buzz of projectors, the scent of strong coffee cutting through the sterile metallic air. Arya Hale carried a tray, the cups balanced with practiced precision, stepping carefully around officers bent over maps, screens, and laptops tracking the latest fleet threat. Her eyes swept the room with the detachment of a shadow, noting the posture of each officer, the tension in their shoulders, the murmurs over encrypted comms. Everyone assumed she was just an aide, a civilian brought in to make their hours of analysis tolerable. They did not know who she really was. Before we begin this mission, hit subscribe and ring the bell, because some stories of courage never made the headlines, but they deserve to be heard. Tell us where you're watching from and who's the hero in your family. Captain Marcus Vane, standing near the center of the room with his hands folded behind his back, spotted her maneuvering past the starboard flank. He raised a sharp hand. "Hail," he said, voice tight with impatience. "Coffee service is done. Step aside." The dismissal was casual, but edged with the subtle disdain of someone accustomed to hierarchies. Arya did not flinch. She kept her expression neutral, placing a cup beside a stack of mission folders before moving on. A low murmur ran through the officers as the door at the aft end opened. Admiral Rowan Kessel entered, impeccably composed, his presence commanding attention. He did not hurry, but each step carried weight, a subtle reverberation against the polished floor. His eyes scanned the room. For a moment, he simply observed, and then he spoke. "Lieutenant Commander Hale, or should I say, silence. Why are you serving coffee in my briefing?" The room froze. Pens covered above paper. Screens continued to glow, but no one typed. Officers shifted, eyes darting, searching one another for confirmation of what they had just heard. Silence. The weight of the words crashed over the room. Arya's hand paused mid-step. The call sign sickoed in the minds of those who had heard stories whispered in corridors. Tales of an electronic warfare pilot who had vanished after a catastrophic mission. The pilot who had commanded an EW jamming cycle at 32 gigahertz, covering a range of 45 nautical miles, saving a task force from total loss, and then disappeared without fanfare. She lowered the tray slowly, allowing it to settle on the side table without a sound. Her eyes met Vane's, and for the first time, she let a flicker of restrained anger show. "I wasn't aware coffee service required a combat debrief," she said evenly, voice steady but threaded with unspent history. Vane's jaw tightened, his authority shaken by recognition. The officers shifted, some standing straighter, others lowering their heads to avoid the sudden weight of guilt. The briefing had been about the resurgence of a Signala narrowband encrypted pulse. 3.2-second repeat cycle that had once destroyed her squadron's formation. The same pattern now flickered across the intelligence console, blinking like a warning from the past. The room had thought this mission was routine. Now it was personal. Arya stepped closer to the central terminal, her movements precise, deliberate, fingers brushing over keyboard keys, tracing the echo of the pulse pattern. Memory surfaced with an electric sting. The cockpit HUD, the green glow over the ocean's edge, the warning alarms that never ceased. Her mind traced the sequence of jamming routines she had executed that night. The calculations of frequency modulation against approaching drones, the milliseconds that had separated survival from catastrophe. Admiral Arya said quietly, not turning, "The signal is identical to the one we encountered 3 years ago." the source. I'm not certain if it's stationary or moving, but the triangulation suggests a craft closing from the northeast quadrant." Kessel nodded once, sharply. "Iron sight to Stonewall." Confirm Vane's hand trembled slightly as he keyed in the response. "Confirmed. Northeast vector, range unknown. Pulse pattern consistent." Arya exhaled slowly. She had not expected to be called back into this world, back into the center of operational planning, yet standing there, the adrenaline prickling at the edges of her focus. She realized the briefing was no longer about status reports or probability matrices. It was about survival. And she was the only one who could read the map the signal left in the sky. The officers around her began to absorb the reality. Whispers spread quietly, officers connecting dots from past missions, recognizing the woman who had carried the weight of a near-catastrophic event in silence. Lt. Jessa Corwin glanced at Arya, admiration tempered with concern, noticing the faint scar along her jaw and the steady precision of her movements. Chief Warrant Officer Timo Reyes adjusted his glasses, leaning closer to the terminal, scanning the incoming data with renewed focus, hesitant to ask the questions he already knew the answers to. The room had shifted. The hierarchy of rank was momentarily irrelevant. Experience, sacrifice, and the ghosts of previous missions had taken command. Vane stepped back slightly, realizing the mistake of misjudgment. Kessel, standing tall with the quiet authority of someone who had seen decades of service and losses, gave the faintest nod to Arya, signaling tacit approval to take the floor, though no one had yet formally invited her to do so. Arya allowed a fraction of a smile. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it carried years of containment. She returned to the console, her hands moving deftly over the input controls, eyes scanning every parameter, every anomaly. The familiar thrill of pattern recognition and operational puzzle solving coursed through her. The pulse pattern on the display was more than a signal. It was a challenge, and she was ready. The coffee tray now rested forgotten, the room silent save for the quiet hum of consoles and the subtle pings marking incoming data packets. The officers absorbed the revelation, understanding finally that the quiet woman among them was no ordinary aide. She was Silence, the pilot who had vanished, whose courage and skill had saved lives, and whose presence now redefined the room's entire mission focus. And as her fingers traced the sequence of frequencies, the first hint of movement on the radar screen confirmed what they all feared. The signal was not dormant. It had returned, and with it, the stakes they had thought were under control. Every eye in the room turned to her, some with guilt, some with awe, all with unspoken recognition that the briefing had just changed in ways none could have predicted. The pulse was back, and Arya Hale had no intention of letting it go unanswered. The signal's pattern flickered again, reminding everyone that the threat they thought solved was now very much alive and tracking them, waiting for Silence to decide the next move. The moment the pulse pattern flashed on the monitor, Arya felt the same cold dread she'd carried out of the cockpit 3 years ago. The intelligence room was dim, bathed in the pale glow of radar screens and status panels, a tight grid of consoles humming beneath fluorescent strips along the ceiling. Officers leaned over keyboards and displays, faces pale in the blue light, murmuring low assessments as the incoming data flowed faster than anyone expected. Arya stepped forward reluctantly, aware of every gaze, every silent calculation about who she was and why she had been brought here. The past was heavy, but it moved in tandem with the present, pressing against her chest in short, sharp bursts. Chief Warrant Officer Timo Reyes was already running the initial capture file on the signal. His hands hovered over the keys, fingers twitching with a mixture of excitement and fear. "Broadcasting the pulse now," he said quietly, almost to himself, then hit enter. The pattern came alive on the monitors, narrow band, 3.2-second cycles. Exactly the same signature she had faced over open water years ago. Her stomach dropped. She stepped closer to the terminal, eyes narrowing. This is it," she said. Voice barely above a whisper, though it cut across the low chatter of the room. Her eyes traced the modulation, recognized the shifting phase, the subtle but deliberate frequency drift. She remembered the cockpit HUD, the green glow of the ocean beneath the A-10 Warthog's wings, the alarms screaming as drones closed in. The calculations, the milliseconds, the split decisions, it all came back in sharp relief. Captain Vane crossed his arms, leaning against the console, skepticism hard in his gaze. "How can you be sure?" he asked, tone clipped, protective of the room's assessment, suspicious of someone who had vanished and returned without warning. Corwin, standing beside him, gave a small nod to Arya. Her eyes held quiet trust, the kind that built slowly a bridge between respect and reliance. "Let her talk, Marcus," she said softly. "She knows." Arya took a deep breath. The signal isn't just repeating, it's adaptive. It reacts to standard jamming protocols. If we approach with conventional EW sweeps, it shifts, it learns. She pointed at the main screen. "See, frequency shift from 32 GHz down to 28.7, triangulated from 62 nautical miles, closing fast. Directional sweep 20 degrees across, reactive to our countermeasures." Vane stiffened. He had seen a lot in his career, but nothing that moved like this, nothing that seemed intelligent and predatory. Reyes adjusted his glasses and glanced at Arya. "That's impossible! Signals don't do that!" "They do when you underestimate them," Arya said. Her gaze flicked to the display again. The pattern shifted mid-analysis, the waveform bending subtly, as if mocking their calculations. "It's tracking us," she said, voice sharp, clipped. The room exhaled collectively, tension spiking. Officers straightened, typing faster, calculating, recalibrating. The signal was alive in a way that made every tactical plan they had seem obsolete. She moved along the row of consoles, checking every overlay, running predictive models with her mind more than the software, recalling emergency EW maneuvers, adaptive cycles, and pulse jamming sequences. Her fingers hovered, ready to execute, but she let the room breathe, letting them absorb the reality. Corwin kept close, monitoring Arya's expression, noting the slight tightening around her eyes. The ghost of past trauma surfacing in micro-expressions, the quick flash of fear, the flicker of pain. Hours or minutes blurred together. The signal continued to shift, forcing the team into reactive calculations, forcing them to trust someone they barely remembered. And as Arya's voice traced the next predicted cycle, the officers around her started to see the pattern, to understand her instinct. Vane's hand, once stiff with doubt, finally relaxed. He let out a quiet breath. Respect, recognition, guilt. It swirled together in one complicated knot that no officer could untangle alone. Arya leaned over the main monitor, tracing the waveforms with deliberate care. Her mind running scenarios, each one riskier than the last. If this signal makes contact with a vessel inside the perimeter, she said, it could trigger a cascade. We've never faced anything like this outside simulation. It's moving on, its own reacting to us in real time. Standard interception won't hold. Her jaw tightened, the memory of lost comrades pressing in. She had failed once. She would not fail again. Reyes and Corwin worked alongside her now, hands flying over keys, eyes on screens, calculations matching her intuition. Vane observed, reluctant to speak, but he was watching, learning the rhythm of a mind that had survived catastrophe and returned, not broken, but sharper. The pulse pattern flashed again, faster, smarter, more relentless. Arya's eyes narrowed, pupils sharp, unwavering. She keyed in tentative countermeasures, tracing algorithms she had crafted in isolation after the last mission, adaptations that might just outthink the signal if implemented in time. Her heart hammered, but her hands were steady. This was familiar, dangerous, necessary. She straightened, voice low but firm. We have to assume it will continue to evolve. It's not a static threat. It's anticipating us, probing us. The officers nodded, silent acknowledgement of the weight she bore. They were no longer just analyzing data. They were part of her strategy, following the lead of someone who had faced the threat directly, alone. Every eye in the room now followed her movements. The intelligence briefing had shifted from routine to survival. The past and present collided as the pattern danced across the monitors. She was silence, not a memory, not a ghost, but a force to be reckoned with, and the signal knew it. The adaptive pulse continued its relentless approach, reminding everyone that what they were facing could not be ignored, and only Arya Hale could chart the path forward to confront it. The moment had arrived for her to step fully back into the role she thought she had left behind. As the threat pulsed closer and the team prepared to follow her lead into the unknown, the room vibrated with the rising distortion of the hostile signal, and for the first time since her last mission, Arya stepped forward instead of back. The command center felt smaller than she remembered, crowded with officers, consoles, and projection screens glowing with red alerts. Alarms blared intermittently, each one punctuating the growing intensity of the incoming threat. The unknown vessel had breached 10 nautical miles, and active jamming pulses rattled every speaker, every data stream, drowning routine communication. Officers froze mid-command, eyes darting, fingers hovering over keys, uncertain which protocol to invoke first. Arya walked calmly between consoles, her gaze sharp, body tense. Absorbing the flow of information with decades of instinct and experience condensed into every measured step, Captain Vane barked orders, trying to maintain control. All units, stabilize arrays, prioritize, shield sync, do not engage until verified. His voice cracked slightly under stress, betraying the fear that everyone felt but refused to name. Arya ignored him, eyes fixed on the shifting pattern across the central monitor. It was alive, almost sentient, reacting instantaneously to every input, every scan, every countermeasure attempted so far. Her mind raced, calculating thresholds, frequencies, timing cycles. She keyed into her personal station, hands moving over controls with practiced precision. "This signal isn't static," she said, voice cutting clearly across the room. "It adapts. Standard defensive sweeps will only make it stronger. We need something different, something unpredictable." Officers leaned closer. Vane's expression hardened. "Explain, Hale." Arya drew a deep breath. "I developed a counter-signal after the crash. It's untested. It's broadband 2238, GHZ, 0.4 of a second cycle. It risks overloading our entire EW array. But if we don't use it, that vessel could cripple the fleet." She looked at the Admiral, whose eyes never left the main monitor. Ironhawk gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. permission implicit, authority unquestioned. Reyes and Corwin moved to her side, assisting with calculations. Fingers flew across consoles, data flowing into predictive models. Vane's jaw tightened, unwilling but watching. Realizing that this woman, once dismissed, now essential, was the only hope of countering the evolving threat. Arya adjusted the amplitude, phased in the modulation sequence, and synchronized the output with every available array in the room. The jamming pulses grew stronger, now a rhythmic hammering against their sensors. Ships within the 10 nautical mile perimeter began registering system lag. Arya didn't flinch. She leaned into the terminal, feeding precise corrections into the countersignal. Watching the pulse pattern flicker, trying to anticipate its next evolution. Heart pounding, adrenaline racing, she keyed the final sequence. "Now," she said. The countersignals surged through the arrays, a coherent wave across 20 to 38 GHz. For a tense heartbeat, nothing responded. Then the hostile pulses began to fracture, splintering and losing focus. Monitors shifted from red to green as the array stabilized. The adaptive signal screamed, overloaded its own routines, and finally collapsed. Arya's console groaned, sparks flaring, circuits pushed to their limit, but the threat had ended. Officers exhaled, some slumping into chairs, others frozen in disbelief. Vane's voice cut through the stunned silence. "Hale, you did it." Arya allowed a weary smile, shoulders easing as tension drained away. Corwin nodded quietly, respect and understanding in her eyes. Admiral Kessel approached, hand on her shoulder. Lieutenant Commander Hale formally reinstated to active duty. The room absorbed the weight of recognition. Vane straightened, his skepticism replaced by acknowledgement of her skill, courage, and leadership. Arya drew a long breath, survivor's guilt mingling with the first real sense of redemption she had felt in years. The monitors reflected calm, the ocean beyond still. Faces softened with relief and awe. She had faced the ghost of her past and it lay defeated. Looking at the cleared signals, she allowed herself a single, powerful feeling, hope for her future, for her place in the squadron, for the knowledge that she had not failed. The hostile pulse was gone, the threat neutralized, but Arya knew that vigilance never ended. The ocean was wide, the unknown endless, and the next challenge could arrive at any moment. And as the officers began to organize recovery and system checks, Arya Hale prepared herself, knowing that while the room was calm for now, the next signal could already be on its way.